In the landscape of human invention, few creations inspire both awe and terror like nuclear weapons. These instruments of unprecedented destruction represent perhaps the most complex intersection of scientific achievement and existential threat in human history. While many technological advances promise to improve our lives, nuclear weapons exist solely to end them, and they possess the capacity to do so on a scale previously unimaginable. The story of nuclear weapons transcends mere military hardware. It encompasses fundamental questions about human nature, international relations, and our collective survival. These weapons have shaped global politics for nearly 8 decades, creating a precarious balance that has simultaneously prevented major wars while holding humanity hostage to the possibility of ultimate catastrophe. To understand our current predicament, we must examine not only the science behind these weapons, but also the strategic doctrines that govern their use, the geopolitical flashpoints where they might be employed, and the seemingly intractable challenges of controlling or eliminating them. This exploration reveals a world where rational calculations about security and deterrence dance precariously with the irrational potential for complete annihilation. The physics of annihilation. The destructive power of nuclear weapons stems from fundamental forces that bind matter itself. Unlike conventional explosives that rely on chemical reactions, nuclear weapons tap into the enormous energies locked within atomic nuclei. This difference in scale is not merely quantitative but qualitative, representing a leap from the destruction of buildings to the obliteration of cities. Nuclear fission forms the foundation of atomic weapons. This process involves forcing heavy atomic nuclei, typically uranium-235 or plutonium-239, to split apart. When these massive atoms break, they release tremendous energy along with additional neutrons that trigger further splits in nearby atoms. This chain reaction, occurring in microseconds, converts a small amount of matter into explosive force equivalent to thousands of tons of conventional explosives. The mathematics underlying this destruction trace back to Einstein's famous equation relating mass and energy. Even tiny amounts of matter, when converted to energy, produce enormous results. The atomic bomb that devastated Hiroshima contained only about 64 kilograms of uranium-235, yet it generated an explosion equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT and killed over 100,000 people. Hydrogen bombs represent an even more terrifying evolution of nuclear physics. These thermonuclear weapons use atomic bombs merely as triggers to initiate nuclear fusion, the same process that powers the sun. Under the extreme temperatures and pressures created by fission, hydrogen isotopes fuse together to form helium, releasing energy far exceeding that of fission alone. Modern hydrogen bombs can be hundreds or even thousands of times more powerful than the weapons used in World War II. The progression from atomic to hydrogen weapons illustrates how scientific knowledge, once unleashed, tends to push toward ever greater extremes. The theoretical limits of thermonuclear weapons are bounded only by practical considerations of delivery and storage rather than physical constraints. Engineers could, in principle, design weapons of virtually unlimited yield. The genesis of global terror. The development of nuclear weapons emerged from the crucible of World War II, when the world's greatest scientific minds united in a desperate race against time. The Manhattan Project represented an unprecedented mobilization of intellectual resources, bringing together physicists, chemists, engineers, and mathematicians in a secret collaboration that would forever change human civilization. The first nuclear test, conducted in the New Mexico desert in July 1945, marked a watershed moment in human history. Scientists who witnessed the detonation understood immediately that they had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. The successful test was followed within weeks by the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, demonstrations of nuclear power that ended World War II but launched the nuclear age. Rather than concluding with victory, the nuclear story accelerated through the Cold War decades. The United States briefly held a nuclear monopoly, but the Soviet Union successfully tested its own atomic bomb in 1949, launching an arms race that would define international relations for generations. Both superpowers pursued increasingly sophisticated and powerful weapons, developing arsenals capable of destroying human civilization multiple times over. The nuclear club gradually expanded beyond the original 2 members. Britain, France, China, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel have all developed nuclear capabilities. each addition complicating the global strategic balance. Today's nuclear landscape includes approximately 12,000 warheads distributed among 9 nations, with the vast majority held by the United States and Russia. This proliferation occurred despite extensive efforts to control the spread of nuclear weapons. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, signed in 1968, created a framework intended to prevent additional countries from acquiring nuclear weapons while promoting disarmament among existing nuclear powers. However, the treaty's success has been mixed, with several nations either rejecting its constraints or developing weapons in violation of their commitments. The strategy of mutual suicide. Nuclear weapons introduced a revolutionary concept to military thinking. The idea that the best way to prevent war might be to make its consequences so terrible that no rational leader would contemplate it. This doctrine, known as deterrence, transformed nuclear weapons from instruments of war into tools of diplomacy and coercion. The logic of deterrence rests on several key assumptions. First, leaders must be rational actors capable of calculating costs and benefits. Second, the threat of retaliation must be credible. Adversaries must believe that nuclear weapons would actually be used in response to attack. Third, nuclear forces must be survivable, capable of launching even after absorbing a first strike. To ensure survivability, nuclear powers developed what strategists call the nuclear triad. This concept involves deploying nuclear weapons across 3 different platforms: land-based missiles in hardened silos, submarine-launched missiles from vessels hidden beneath the oceans, and nuclear bombs and cruise missiles carried by strategic aircraft. The redundancy built into this system ensures that no surprise attack could eliminate all of a nation's nuclear forces. The submarine leg of the triad proves particularly important for deterrence. Nuclear submarines can remain submerged and undetected for months, providing a guaranteed second strike capability. Even if an enemy destroyed all land-based missiles and aircraft, submarines could still deliver devastating retaliation. This assurance of mutual destruction has helped maintain strategic stability between major nuclear powers. However, deterrence strategies contain inherent contradictions and risks. The credibility that makes deterrence work also makes accidents and miscalculations more dangerous. Leaders must appear willing to use weapons they desperately hope never to employ. Communication during crises becomes critical, as misunderstandings can trigger escalation spirals that no one intended. The psychological dimensions of deterrence add another layer of complexity. Nuclear strategies depend not only on actual capabilities, but on perceptions and beliefs about what adversaries might do. This subjectivity introduces unpredictability into supposedly rational calculations, as leaders must guess at their opponent's intentions, resolve, and risk tolerance. Contemporary flashpoints and nuclear risks. While the Cold War ended over 3 decades ago, nuclear weapons remain central to several of today's most dangerous international conflicts. These modern flashpoints demonstrate how nuclear weapons continue to shape geopolitical behavior and constrain policy options for world leaders. The conflict in Ukraine has brought nuclear threats back to the forefront of international attention. Russia's repeated references to its nuclear arsenal serve multiple strategic purposes: deterring direct military intervention by NATO countries, limiting the types and quantities of weapons provided to Ukraine, and signaling resolve to domestic and international audiences. While the actual use of nuclear weapons remains unlikely, these threats have successfully influenced Western decision-making and highlighted the coercive power of nuclear arsenals. The relationship between India and Pakistan represents perhaps the world's most volatile nuclear rivalry. These neighboring countries have fought multiple wars, maintained competing claims over Kashmir, and possess nuclear weapons with relatively short flight times between their territories. Unlike the superpowers during the Cold War, India and Pakistan lack robust crisis management mechanisms and communication channels that might prevent misunderstandings from escalating to nuclear exchange. Both countries have developed tactical nuclear weapons designed for battlefield use rather than strategic deterrence. These smaller warheads lower the threshold for nuclear use by making them seem more proportionate to conventional military threats. The compressed geography of South Asia means that any nuclear exchange would likely affect both countries, regardless of who initiated it. Yet this mutual vulnerability has not eliminated the risk of nuclear conflict. North Korea presents a unique challenge in nuclear diplomacy. Unlike other nuclear powers that view their arsenals primarily as deterrents, North Korea has demonstrated willingness to use nuclear threats as active tools of coercion. The country's leadership has made explicit threats to use nuclear weapons preemptively if they perceive existential threats to their regime. This departure from traditional deterrence logic makes North Korea particularly unpredictable and dangerous. The potential for conflict between China and the United States over Taiwan introduces nuclear risks into one of the world's most important bilateral relationships. While both countries have strong incentives to avoid nuclear conflict, the stakes involved in Taiwan's status are so high for both sides that miscalculation remains possible. China's expanding nuclear arsenal and the United States' alliance commitments create a complex strategic triangle where nuclear weapons influence every aspect of the relationship. The mathematics of global catastrophe. Modern nuclear weapons possess destructive power that defies comprehension. A single thermonuclear warhead can be hundreds of times more powerful than the bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Contemporary intercontinental ballistic missiles often carry multiple independently targetable warheads, allowing one missile to destroy several cities simultaneously. Computer simulations of nuclear conflict scenarios reveal outcomes almost too horrible to contemplate. Even a limited nuclear exchange involving fewer than 100 weapons could trigger global climate effects through the injection of smoke and soot into the upper atmosphere. This nuclear winter phenomenon would reduce global temperatures, shorten growing seasons, and potentially cause widespread famine affecting billions of people far from the conflict zone. A full-scale nuclear war between major powers would represent an unprecedented catastrophe in human history. Models suggest that such a conflict could kill hundreds of millions of people within hours through direct effects of blast, heat, and radiation. The indirect effects, including environmental destruction, agricultural collapse, and societal breakdown, would likely claim billions more lives in the months and years following the exchange. The long-term consequences of nuclear war extend far beyond immediate casualties. Radioactive contamination would render large areas uninhabitable for decades or centuries. Critical infrastructure, including power grids, communication networks, and transportation systems, would be destroyed. The complex supply chains that support modern civilization would collapse, potentially forcing survivors back to subsistence-level existence. Medical systems would be completely overwhelmed by the scale of casualties and the specialized nature of radiation injuries. Most hospitals lack the capacity to treat large numbers of radiation victims, and the destruction of medical infrastructure would compound the crisis. Psychological trauma would affect entire populations, while genetic damage might persist across generations. The disarmament dilemma. Given the catastrophic risks posed by nuclear weapons, the question of why they haven't been eliminated becomes paramount. The answer lies in the complex interplay of security concerns, technological capabilities, and political calculations that make unilateral disarmament appear dangerous to national leaders. Countries maintain nuclear arsenals primarily because they fear that their adversaries possess them. This security dilemma creates a circular logic where each nation's weapons justify others' arsenals, making collective disarmament extremely difficult to achieve. Even countries that might prefer a world without nuclear weapons hesitate to give up their own deterrent, while potential enemies retain theirs. Trust represents the fundamental obstacle to nuclear disarmament. Nations must have confidence that their rivals have actually eliminated their weapons, rather than simply hiding them. The verification technologies needed to ensure complete disarmament are extensive and intrusive, requiring access to sensitive military and industrial facilities that countries are reluctant to provide. Past arms control agreements have achieved modest successes in reducing overall numbers of warheads and limiting certain types of deployments. Treaties between the United States and Russia have cut their combined arsenals from Cold War peaks of over 60,000 warheads to approximately 12,000 today. However, many of these agreements are now expiring or have been suspended due to deteriorating political relationships. The current international environment appears less conducive to arms control than during previous decades. Rising tensions between major powers, the breakdown of existing treaties, and the emergence of new nuclear states have complicated disarmament efforts. Some nuclear powers are modernizing and expanding their arsenals rather than reducing them, suggesting that the trend toward disarmament may have reversed. Technical challenges also complicate disarmament verification. Modern nuclear weapons use advanced materials and designs that are difficult to detect remotely. Countries could potentially maintain clandestine programs or rapidly reconstitute eliminated capabilities if they preserved key technologies and materials. These possibilities undermine confidence in disarmament agreements and provide justifications for maintaining nuclear hedges. Diplomatic solutions and crisis management. Despite the challenges, diplomatic engagement remains essential for managing nuclear risks and preventing catastrophic conflicts. The Cold War demonstrated that even adversarial nuclear powers can establish communication channels, agree on risk reduction measures, and negotiate arms control agreements that enhance mutual security. Crisis management mechanisms proved their worth during several dangerous Cold War incidents. Direct communication lines between Washington and Moscow allowed leaders to exchange messages quickly during tense situations. Joint agreements on preventing accidental war established procedures for handling technical malfunctions or misunderstandings that might otherwise trigger military responses. Contemporary nuclear relationships often lack such robust communication systems. Many nuclear powers maintain minimal diplomatic contact with their rivals, increasing the risks of misunderstanding during crises. The absence of regular dialogue means that leaders may misinterpret each other's actions or fail to recognize opportunities for de-escalation. Modern arms control efforts must adapt to new technological realities and strategic relationships. Traditional agreements focus primarily on limiting numbers of deployed warheads and delivery vehicles. Current challenges include emerging technologies like hypersonic weapons, cyber threats to nuclear command systems, and the integration of conventional and nuclear forces in military planning. Multilateral approaches to nuclear risk reduction face particular difficulties as the number of nuclear powers has increased. Bilateral agreements between superpowers were challenging enough to negotiate and implement, creating verification and compliance mechanisms acceptable to 9 different nuclear states, each with unique strategic circumstances and political systems, represents an enormously complex undertaking. Nevertheless, diplomatic engagement offers the only realistic path toward reducing nuclear risks over the long term. Technical solutions alone cannot address the underlying security concerns that drive nuclear acquisition and retention. Only through sustained political dialogue can countries begin to address the mutual mistrust and competitive dynamics that perpetuate nuclear dangers. Living with the nuclear reality. Nuclear weapons have created a permanent feature of the international landscape that humanity must learn to manage rather than eliminate in the near term. This reality requires sophisticated thinking about how to minimize risks while acknowledging that complete security remains impossible in a nuclear world. The paradox of nuclear weapons lies in their simultaneous threat to and preservation of peace. Major powers have avoided direct military conflicts since 1945, partly because of fear that such conflicts could escalate to nuclear exchange. This long peace represents an unprecedented period in human history, yet it depends on maintaining weapons capable of ending civilization. The psychological burden of living under nuclear threat affects societies in ways that remain poorly understood. Entire generations have grown up knowing that human extinction remains a possibility that could unfold within hours. This background awareness shapes cultural expressions, political movements, and individual life decisions in subtle but pervasive ways. Educational efforts about nuclear weapons face the challenge of informing people about serious risks without promoting despair or paralysis. Citizens in democratic societies need sufficient understanding of nuclear issues to participate meaningfully in policy debates. Yet the technical complexity and emotional weight of these topics make public engagement difficult. The maintenance of nuclear arsenals requires enormous ongoing investments in scientific research, industrial production, and military training. These expenditures divert resources from other national priorities while creating vested interests in perpetuating nuclear capabilities. The industrial and bureaucratic momentum behind nuclear programs makes policy changes increasingly difficult over time. Toward an uncertain future. The future of nuclear weapons remains deeply uncertain, shaped by technological developments, geopolitical changes, and evolving strategic thinking that cannot be predicted with confidence. Several trends suggest that nuclear risks may increase rather than decrease in coming decades. The proliferation of nuclear weapons to additional countries appears likely to continue despite international efforts to prevent it. Several nations possess the technical capabilities to develop nuclear weapons, and may choose to do so if their security environments deteriorate. Each new nuclear power complicates global strategic calculations and increases the possibilities for accidents or miscalculations. Technological advances may alter the nuclear landscape in unpredictable ways. Developments in missile defense, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and space-based systems could upset existing strategic balances and create new incentives for nuclear competition. The integration of nuclear and conventional forces may blur traditional escalation thresholds and increase the chances of conflicts crossing the nuclear threshold. Climate change and resource scarcity may generate new sources of international conflict that could involve nuclear powers. As environmental pressures mount and habitability of some regions declines, competition for resources and territory may intensify. Nuclear weapons could play increasingly prominent roles in these conflicts, either as tools of coercion or as ultimate insurance policies for national survival. The erosion of international institutions and norms that helped manage nuclear risks during the Cold War poses additional dangers. Arms control treaties are expiring or being abandoned, diplomatic channels are atrophying, and shared understandings about nuclear weapons use are weakening. Without these stabilizing mechanisms, the international system may become more prone to nuclear crises. Yet opportunities for progress remain available if political leaders choose to pursue them. New technologies might enable more effective verification of disarmament agreements. Changing generational attitudes toward nuclear weapons could create political momentum for risk reduction measures. Regional security improvements might reduce incentives for nuclear acquisition in some parts of the world. The ultimate challenge of nuclear weapons lies not in their technical complexity, but in the human and political dimensions of their control. These weapons represent a test of our species' capacity for rational collective action in the face of existential threats. The outcome of this test will determine not only the survival of current generations, but the legacy we leave for all who come after us. Managing this challenge requires sustained attention, resources, and political will from leaders and citizens alike. The stakes are too high and the risks too great to leave nuclear policy solely in the hands of governments and experts. The future of human civilization may depend on our collective ability to grapple seriously with the nuclear reality we have created and to find ways to live safely in its shadow.